I'm Amanda. I'm 36. And the child I never held, never named, never knew walked into my wedding with a legal firearm on his belt and an envelope full of everything my parents stole from both of us. This is not a redemption story. Not exactly. It's a story about the chapters we bury so deep we convince ourselves they're someone else's book, and the moment the ground cracks open and forces us to read what we wrote. It's about a gun that wasn't pointed at anyone and still destroyed everything I thought I was building. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories, where we tell quiet stories about families, about the children we lose and the adults we become without them, and about the terrifying courage it takes to choose truth over the performance of healing. If a story ever made you feel less alone, that's why we're here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's walk through this one together. Here's my story. The morning I found out I was pregnant, I was eating cereal. Not special cereal. Cheerios, the generic kind from the grocery store where my mother shopped with coupons and prayed over the receipt. I was 15, a sophomore at Grace Baptist Academy, the daughter of Pastor Thomas and First Lady Margaret of the largest evangelical church in Kerrville, Texas. I had never skipped school, never smoked, never kissed a boy until Tyler Morrison cornered me at a youth group lock-in, and I discovered that sin felt like breath held too long and released. I missed my period in February. By March, I was vomiting every morning, hiding in the bathroom with the shower running, telling my mother it was a stomach bug. By April, she found the pregnancy test in my trash, not hidden well enough, never hidden well enough, and the world I'd known ended without a sound. "Get dressed," she said, standing in my doorway with the test in her hand, her face the same color as the porcelain Jesus on my nightstand. "Your father wants to see you in his study." The study was where discipline happened, where parishioners came to confess, where deacons came to scheme, where I had sat 100 times for lectures about modesty, purity, the precious gift that was my body and God's plan for it. I sat in the same wooden chair, the same one where Tyler had sat when he came to accept Jesus at age 12, the same one where my mother sat every Sunday before service, reviewing her notes. My father didn't yell, that wasn't his way. He spoke softly, each word weighted with the authority of someone who believed he was God's mouthpiece. "Margaret tells me you're with child." I didn't answer, couldn't. The words were too large for my throat. "Tyler's parents have been informed. He's agreed to stay silent. His future, college, ministry, the life God has planned for him, will not be derailed by your mistake." My mistake, not ours. Not Tyler's, who had held my shoulders and whispered that he loved me, who had disappeared the moment my mother called his father. Just mine. "What happens now?" I whispered. My father opened his Bible, not to read, just to hold, the way he held it during difficult conversations, as if the leather binding contained answers I wasn't holy enough to hear. "You'll go to stay with Aunt Ruth in Nebraska. She runs a home for girls in similar situations. You'll have the baby there, you'll give it up for adoption, and you'll return here, chastened, forgiven, ready to serve the Lord who redeems even the fallen." "Can I?" My voice broke. "Can I see it, hold it, just once?" "No." My mother's voice from the doorway, sharp as a cracked bell. "That creates attachment. Bonding. It makes the separation harder than God intends. You'll sign the papers, you'll pray for forgiveness, and you'll never speak of this again. Not to us. Not to anyone. As far as this family is concerned, this never happened." I left for Nebraska the next morning. 16 hours in my father's pickup, my mother driving in silence, me in the back seat with a suitcase of clothes that no longer fit. I gave birth in August, a clinic attached to Aunt Ruth's home, with a nurse who didn't make eye contact and a doctor who called me dear while I screamed. I never saw the baby. They told me later, much later, when I demanded details for my own sanity, that it was a boy. 7 pounds 2 ounces. Apgar score of 9. Perfectly healthy. Perfectly silent in my arms that never held him. I signed the papers with a hand that shook so hard the nurse had to steady it. Closed adoption. No contact. No information exchanged. The baby would go to a good Christian family selected by the agency, and I would return to Texas to finish high school, to apply to colleges, to build a life where this chapter simply didn't exist. I was back in Kerrville for my junior year. No one asked where I'd been. My parents had told the congregation I'd been ministering to youth in the inner city, a lie so absurd that only people who wanted to believe it could accept it. I graduated valedictorian, because what else was I going to do with my rage? I went to UT Austin on a full scholarship because education was the only escape that didn't require explaining where I'd been. I became a therapist. specializing in adoption trauma. The irony was not lost on me, though I never spoke of it in sessions, never disclosed my history to colleagues, never let the wound breathe. I was healed, I told myself. I had processed it. The baby was with a good family, better than I could have provided, and my pain was just residual guilt that I could manage with meditation and boundaries. I married at 26. A man named Brian, a software engineer, kind in the way of people who'd never been tested. We divorced in 2 years because I couldn't explain why I flinched at pregnancy announcements, why I cried in baby aisles, why I refused to even discuss having children. "You're not over whatever happened to you," Brian said on his way out, "and you won't let me in to help." He was right. I wasn't over it, I wasn't even under it. I was carrying it silently the way I'd learned to carry everything. Then I met David. At a conference in Phoenix where I'd moved to escape Texas and its ghosts. He was a widower, 40, with a 12-year-old daughter named Sophie who had her mother's eyes and her father's reserve. Sophie didn't want a new mother, she'd made that clear, but she wanted someone who didn't try to replace the one she'd lost. I understood that. I was an expert in not replacing people. David proposed after 18 months. Small ring, smaller ceremony, just family and close friends in a garden venue outside Phoenix. I said yes because I loved him, because Sophie was learning to trust me, because at 36 I finally believed I could have a family without the one I'd lost haunting every moment. I was wrong. The ghost was just waiting for an invitation. The wedding was scheduled for 4 p.m. on a Saturday in October. 70 guests, small by my mother's standards, she wasn't invited, hadn't spoken to me in 5 years since I confronted her about Nebraska, about the lies, about the sermons she'd allowed my father to preach using my shame as illustration. David's family was there, his sister, his parents, colleagues from his architecture firm. Sophie's friends from school, my 2 close friends from graduate school, a scattering of Phoenix acquaintances who knew me as the competent therapist, the woman who had her life together. I wore ivory, not white, second marriage. I joked, though David was my second and I was his first after death. The dress was simple, elegant, the kind of thing that made me feel like the adult I'd become rather than the child I'd been. Sophie was my bridesmaid, reluctant but present, her hair in braids she'd insisted on doing herself. The ceremony was in a garden, desert landscaping, cacti in bloom, the mountains behind us turning gold in the afternoon light. David was at the altar, handsome in his gray suit, Sophie fidgeting beside him. I was walking down the aisle, no father to give me away, just my own 2 feet carrying me toward a future I'd chosen when I saw him. He stood at the entrance to the garden, framed by the iron gate, backlit by the sun. 20 years old, maybe 21. Tall, lean, dressed in a dark suit that fit him poorly, the way young men's suits do when they haven't yet grown into their shoulders. He had my eyes, green, too large for his face, the eyes that had looked back at me from mirrors my whole life. My jaw square and stubborn, and on his left cheek a small dark mole identical to mine, the genetic stamp I'd never expected to see on another face. He was beautiful. He was terrifying. And on his belt, visible, legal, permitted in Arizona's open carry landscape, was a handgun. The music didn't stop. I didn't stop walking. Some part of me, the therapist, the trained observer, the woman who'd spent 2 decades managing other people's crises, kept my feet moving while my mind screamed. He was watching me. Not moving, not speaking, just watching with an expression I couldn't read. Curiosity, rage, the blankness of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still didn't know how it would feel. I reached the altar. David took my hands. The officiant, a judge, a friend of David's, began to speak. And then the stranger moved. He walked down the aisle. Not fast, not threatening. Just walking the way anyone walks at a wedding, except that everyone turned to look, except that the murmurs started, except that David's hand tightened on mine and I felt his confusion before I heard it. "Amanda." The stranger stopped 10 feet from the altar. Close enough to see the sweat on my upper lip, the tremor in my hands, the way my carefully constructed composure was cracking like old paint. "Amanda," he said again, not a question, a confirmation. His voice was calm, educated, with an accent I couldn't place, not Texas, not anywhere specific, the voice of someone who'd moved too much to have a home. "Who are you?" David's voice, sharp, protective, confused. The stranger didn't look at him, just at me. "I'm the reason she flinches at baby announcements. The reason she cries in Target. The reason she became a therapist who fixes everyone except herself." He reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, aware of the gun on his belt, aware of how this looked and pulled out a brown envelope. My name is Caleb, and 20 years ago this woman gave birth to me in a clinic in Nebraska and never held me. She signed papers she didn't read, under pressure she couldn't resist, and she spent 2 decades pretending I was a blessing she gave away rather than a child she surrendered. The garden was silent. 70 people, frozen, watching a play they didn't understand. I saw Sophie, her eyes wide, too young for this but old enough to recognize damage. I saw David's sister, hand over her mouth. I saw my friends from graduate school, the ones who'd never known, their faces shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Caleb, I whispered. The name I'd never spoken, never known, never allowed myself to imagine. How did you find you? He smiled, and it was my smile. The one I used in difficult sessions. The one that didn't reach the eyes. I spent 3 years in Utah with a family that beat me with belts for my own good. I spent 2 years on the streets in Denver, in shelters, working jobs that paid cash and asked no questions. I spent 1 year in a juvenile facility because I stole a car to get to Texas, to find you, and I got caught first. And then I spent 6 months working construction in Phoenix, saving money, buying this suit, this gun, this right to stand here and be seen. He held up the envelope. This is from your father's church archives. Your mother kept it. The fallen daughter she called you in sermons. Redeemed by God's grace, a lesson in humility. They used your photo, Amanda. The one they took before they sent you away, pregnant and smiling, the one they showed to congregations to prove that even pastors' daughters could be saved. I found it when I broke into the church basement at 19. I found everything. He pulled out a photograph, me at 15, round-faced, terrified, smiling because my mother had told me to, because the camera was God's witness to my repentance. I looked at that girl and didn't recognize her. She was someone else, someone I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten the shape of her grave. I didn't come here to hurt you, Caleb said. The gun is legal, visible. I could have hidden it, could have made this more threatening. I want you to see it, to understand that I am capable of violence, that I have been trained in violence by people who claim to love me, that I walk through the world armed because I learned early that no one protects the unwanted. He stepped closer, 5 feet now, close enough to touch, though neither of us reached out. I came here because I need you to make a choice. Not for me, I'm past needing things from you. For yourself. You can marry this man, continue this performance of a healed life, keep being the therapist who treats adoption trauma without admitting she has it. Or you can stop, turn around, look at me, and finally tell the truth about what happened to us. David's hand was tight on mine, too tight, the pressure of a man who felt his future slipping away and didn't understand why. Amanda, who is this person? What is he talking about? I looked at David, at his kind face, his confusion, his love that had never been tested by anything larger than his first wife's death. I looked at Sophie, 12 years old, watching me with the eyes of a child who'd already lost one mother and was about to lose another. I looked at Caleb, my son, my stranger, my mirror, standing with a gun and a photo and 20 years of absence that felt like presence. And I made a choice. Not the one anyone expected, not the dramatic refusal or the tearful embrace or the Hollywood moment of recognition. Something simpler, something harder. I let go of David's hand. I'm sorry, I said, not to Caleb, to David, to Sophie, to the life I'd been building, the future I'd been promising, the family I'd been constructing from carefully selected pieces that didn't include the largest piece of my past. Amanda, David's voice broke. I can't marry you today, I said. I can't marry anyone today, because this. I gestured at Caleb, at the gun, at the envelope, at the photo of a girl I didn't know. This is real. And I've spent 20 years pretending it isn't, and I can't pretend anymore. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone. I stepped down from the altar. My dress, ivory, elegant, the dress of a woman who had her life together, dragged in the desert dirt. I didn't care. I walked to Caleb, stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the tears he wasn't shedding, the control he'd learned in places that broke weaker people. I don't know you, I said. I don't know if I can love you. I don't know if you can love me or if what you feel is rage that looks like need. But I know that I failed you before I knew you, that my parents failed both of us. That the system that took you from me was built on shame and silence, and the lie that some stories are too dangerous to tell. I held out my hand. Not to touch him, I didn't have that right, not yet, maybe not ever, just to offer. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not offering explanations that would make this okay because nothing makes this okay. I'm just asking you to walk with me, away from here. To somewhere we can talk, really talk for the first time in 20 years. And if you say no, I'll understand, I'll deserve it. He looked at my hand, looked at my face, looked at the wedding I'd just destroyed, the guests in shock, the groom standing at an altar that no longer had a purpose. You ruined your life, he said, not accusing, observing. I know. For a stranger with a gun, I know. Why? Because you shouldn't be a stranger, and the gun shouldn't be necessary. And because, I swallowed, the truth finally finding words after decades of silence. Because you existed before I knew you existed. You've been real this whole time, while I was pretending you were a blessing I gave away, and I can't pretend anymore. I don't know how to be your mother. I don't know if I can be anyone's mother after what was taken from me, but I know how to stop lying, and that's what I'm doing, stopping. He didn't take my hand, but he didn't walk away. He stood there, the gun on his belt, the photo in his hand, the envelope of evidence against my family that had shaped his rage, and he nodded, once. Small, almost invisible. There's a diner, he said. 2 miles from here, open 24 hours, we can talk there. Okay. I walked with him toward the gate, past David who didn't call my name, past Sophie who whispered Mom. Not to me, I realized, but to the memory of the woman she'd lost, the woman I was failing to replace. Past my friends, my colleagues, my carefully constructed life. At the gate, Caleb stopped, turned back, looked at the 70 people who'd come to celebrate a wedding and were witnessing something else entirely. For the record, he said, his voice carrying in the desert air, I didn't come here to ruin anything. I came here because I needed to know if she was real, if the woman who gave me away was a person or a ghost, and now I know. He looked at me. She's real, and she's as broken as I am. That's not a happy ending, but it's an honest one. The diner was fluorescent lit, empty except for a trucker in the corner and a waitress who didn't look up from her phone. We sat in a booth, Caleb and I, the gun visible on his belt, my wedding dress visible in its ivory absurdity, 2 people who shared DNA and nothing else. He talked first. For 2 hours, without stopping, the story he'd never told anyone completely. The adoptive parents in Utah, the Whitmores, Elder Whitmore and Sister Whitmore, pillars of their Mormon ward. The belt that corrected him for crying, for questioning, for being difficult. The closet where he was locked to reflect on his sins, sometimes for days, with a bucket for waste and a Bible for company. The discovery at 16, in a locked file cabinet he'd broken into, of his adoption papers, my name, the address of the church in Texas where his story had begun. I hitchhiked to Texas, he said, stirring coffee he'd never drink, broke into the church basement, found the archives, your photo, your father's sermons, the whole narrative of the fallen daughter redeemed. I was looking for you, but I found a story, a performance. Your parents used you, Amanda, used your pain to scare congregations, to raise money, to prove their righteousness, and you were gone, living your life while I was being beaten in their name. I listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't defend, didn't explain. Just listened. The way I trained my clients to listen, the way I'd never been able to listen to myself. At 18, I aged out of the system. The Whitmores didn't want me anymore. I was too old, too angry, too broken to be saved. I lived on the streets, in shelters, working construction, dishwashing, anything that paid cash and didn't ask for history. I bought the gun at 21, after a man in a shelter tried to. He stopped, jaw tightening. After I learned that being armed is the only way some people will take you seriously. Why the wedding? I asked. Why today? He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something other than rage, vulnerability, need, the child he'd been, still present behind the armor of the adult he'd become. Because I needed you to choose, he said. Not me over him, just truth over performance. I needed to know if you were capable of that. If the woman in the photo, the girl who smiled while pregnant and terrified, if she was still in there, or if they'd killed her completely. And if I hadn't, if I'd married him, ignored you, called the police. He was quiet for a long moment. Then I would have known that you were gone, that the mother I imagined was just that, imagination, and I would have left. Gone to Mexico, maybe, started over where no one knew my name. He touched the gun, briefly, unconsciously. This wasn't for you, it was for me. The only way I could walk into your life and survive whatever I found. I understood that. Understood it better than I wanted to. The armor we wear, the weapons we carry, the performances that keep us alive when the truth would destroy us. Caleb, I said, the name strange in my mouth, foreign and familiar at once. I don't know how to be your mother. I don't know if I can be anyone's mother. What was done to me, what I allowed to be done, it broke something. The part that trusts, that nurtures, that believes in the goodness of bringing children into a world that takes them away. I don't need a mother, he said quickly, defensively. I need. He stopped, frustrated, the words not fitting the need. I need to not be invisible. To not be the secret that everyone knows but no one acknowledges. I need you to exist in my story, even if you can't be in my life. I can do that, I said. I can exist. I can tell the truth finally to myself and to anyone who asks. I can stop being the therapist who treats adoption trauma while pretending she doesn't have it. I can stop being the woman who almost married a good man while carrying a grave in her chest. We sat in silence. The trucker left. The waitress changed shifts. The fluorescent lights buzzed their eternal song. What happens now? Asked. I don't know. I need to find a place to live. I was living with David, planning to move after the wedding. I need to figure out how to explain this to Sophie, to my friends, to the life I just detonated. I laughed, a broken sound, the first real emotion I'd allowed myself in hours. I need to stop needing things to be okay. Because they're not okay, they may never be okay. And that's the truth I've been avoiding. Caleb reached into his pocket, out a key, slid it across the table. I rent a studio. It's small, barely furnished, but it's mine. You can stay there. Not with me. I need space, boundaries, time to figure out what this is. But nearby, in the same building, where we can learn to be whatever we're going to be. I looked at the key. At his hand, scarred across the knuckles, construction work and fights and the accumulated damage of a life without softness. At my own hand, manicured, wedding ringless, the hand of a woman who just destroyed her future for a past she couldn't change. Okay, I said, that was 8 months ago. I live in the studio next to Caleb's. Small, furnished with things I bought myself, no David, no shared history, no performance of partnership. I work 3 days a week at a community health center, seeing clients who can't afford private therapy, people with real problems that don't trigger my own. The other days I write, not a book, not yet, just words. My story, Caleb's story, the story of a girl who smiled for camera while her world ended. Caleb works construction still. Comes home dirty, exhausted, sometimes angry in ways he doesn't understand and I don't try to fix. We eat dinner together sometimes, not always, not scheduled, just when the loneliness overlaps. We don't talk about the wedding, the gun, the envelope. We talk about work, about politics, about the movie he watched or the client I couldn't help. Surface things, safe things, the small talk of strangers learning to be something else. He goes to therapy. Not with me, with someone else, a man named Marcus who specializes in trauma and doesn't know my name. I go to therapy too, with someone who knows everything, who doesn't let me hide behind my professional training, who asks the hard questions I spent 20 years avoiding. Sophie emails sometimes. Short, careful messages, Dad is sad. I don't understand why you left. Are you ever coming back? I answer honestly as I can. I left because I wasn't whole and I couldn't pretend anymore. I don't know if I'm coming back, not to who I was. I love you, Sophie, that hasn't changed, but love isn't always enough to make someone stay. David and I divorced quickly, quietly. He didn't fight me on assets, there weren't many, and he was too hurt to care about money. Sophie stayed with him, as she should. I see her occasionally, for coffee, awkward conversations where we both pretend this is normal. She's 30 now, angry, confused, beginning to understand that adults are just children who grew older without growing up. My parents found out about Caleb. Not from me, from a former parishioner who saw the wedding video someone posted online. My father called once, left a voicemail. You've shamed us again, but God forgives even when we don't deserve it. I didn't call back. My mother sent a letter, pages of scripture and justification, ending with, we did what was best, you were 16, you couldn't have raised him. I burned it, not in anger, in clarity, the best for whom I was 16, yes. But I was also capable of love, of holding, of naming. They took that from me. They took it from Caleb, and they called it God's will. Caleb and I don't celebrate holidays together. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We are not a family in the traditional sense, no shared meals on Thanksgiving, no matching sweaters, no photos for social media. We are two people, damaged by the same system, learning to occupy space near each other without demanding more than the other can give. Last month, he showed me his gun safe. Bought it after the wedding, he said. The gun stays there now, locked away, not carried daily. I don't need it to be seen anymore, he said. You saw me, that was the point. Do you forgive me? I asked. The question I'd been afraid to ask, the one that hung between us like smoke. He was quiet for a long time. Then, I don't know, I don't think forgiveness is a thing you do once and it's done. I think it's a practice, like therapy, like showing up for dinner when you'd rather be alone. Some days I forgive you, some days I don't. Some days I don't think about it at all. And he paused, searching. That's okay. That's enough for now, the only promise we can make each other, the only honest one. I still wear ivory sometimes. Not the dress that's in storage, a relic of a life I didn't live. But ivory sweaters, ivory scarves, small rebellions against the idea that second chances must be white, pure, unmarked. I wear them to remind myself that I chose truth over performance, that I walked away from an altar toward a stranger with a gun, that I am capable of destruction and reconstruction in the same breath. That's my story. If you have a chapter you buried so deep you convinced yourself it was someone else's, hear me, it's yours. It will always be yours. And the only way through it is to dig it up, hold it in your hands, and decide what to build from the bones. I'm Amanda. I'm 37 now. I was a bride who walked away, a mother who met her son at 20, a therapist who is finally doing her own work. I don't know what comes next, but for the first time in my life, I'm not pretending to know. And that uncertainty, that honesty, that willingness to be seen as broken is the only gift I have left to give. See you in the next story.